What's up, everybody? On today's show, another big-time SEC contributor lost for the year to injury, and ESPN puts out their preseason All-America list. There's a few SEC names missing. We're going to dive into that. Locked on SEC starts right now.
You are Locked on SEC, your daily podcast on the Southeastern Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And what's up, everybody? Welcome to Locked on SEC. It's great to have you guys along. I'm Chris Gordy. Thanks for making Locked on SEC your first listen every day. Shout out to everydayers. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, covering your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by the Game Time app. Download Game Time today. Create an account. Use our code Locked on College. Get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. All right, let's dive right into it. As you heard the news yesterday, Missouri having to account for a loss of a newcomer, a guy who was expected to play a key role on their defense this season. Darris Smith, edge rusher, was injured in practice on Tuesday, and his knee injury is going to sideline him for the entirety of the upcoming college football season. Smith played his first two college seasons at Georgia, part of Kirby Smart's program, and saw time as a reserve player in each of the seasons, was expected to play a much bigger role this year as the rotational piece on Mizzou's defensive front, but he will no longer do that in 2024. If you remember when he came out of high school, he was a four-star composite rating, 6'5", 240 pounds, 24/7 Sports, like we said, four-star recruit. While he was with Georgia, he had recorded 6 tackles and a tackle for a loss, but Missouri was looking for some big pieces defensively, replacing, obviously, Darius Robinson up front, who was a first-round pick, and a Rakestraw in the secondary, and other guys. They lost their defense coordinator, Blake Baker, to LSU this offseason, so, they were hoping to get some more pressure up front, and they will have to look to the likes of others, as Darris Smith will not be able to fill that role this year. The Tigers do return Johnny Walker Jr. at one defensive end spot, but they are, like we said, trying to place Darius Robinson's production. Joe Moore, the third, and Georgia Tech transfer Eddie Kelly are in the mix for playing time there. Smith did not redshirt while at Georgia, so he will still have 2 years of eligibility remaining coming over to Mizzou. But just looking at some of the reaction on social media, Brandon Kiley on Twitter saying, huge loss for Mizzou. He said the focus will now be on guys like Zion Young, Eddie Kelly. Remember Williams Nwaneri, the big-time stud, true freshman edge rusher coming in. He said they're going to rely on those guys to sustain pressure, along with Johnny Walker Jr. coming off the edge. Jesse Simonson of On 3 Sports, he said this is a yikes injury for Mizzou. Said they were very high on the former top 50 recruit from Georgia, who was set to fill a key pass rushing void. So, yeah, look, it's just it's another string of losses of big name guys in the SEC, or guys who were expected to be big time contributors this year, and Mizzou loses Darris Smith. But again, Joe Moore, number 45 in there, Johnny Walker, number 15. Maybe that joker spot is where you'll see them. True defensive end, more Zion Young, Eddie Kelly, Williams Nwaneri. But, on the interior of the line, they got Christian Williams, Chris McClellan, Sterling Webb in the mix there. But, look, Missouri's defense is going to have to find some guys, because we know the schedule sets up well for them, but they still got to go out there and execute. And suddenly you start to look at, some of those games and say, all right, well, we're going to have to get some defensive pressure in this game and that game. So we'll see what they are able to do. All right, ESPN, they put out their preseason All-America team, and we'll take a look at this. Chris Lowe put this up on ESPN.com yesterday, saying college football like we've never experienced is on the doorstep, with games less than 2 weeks away. So they revealed ESPN's 2024 preseason All-America team. And so we look at the offense. And there's some SEC guys on this list, so we'll kind of run through it. At quarterback, they got Carson Beck and from Georgia, and they list in his first season as a starter a year ago, Beck almost made it look too easy at times, leading the SEC and ranking third nationally with 3,900 yards. Some of his top playmakers moved on, including Brock Bowers, but Beck is at his best, spreading the ball around, finding open targets. He completed 72% of his passes, was intercepted only 6 times last year in 417 pass attempts. So got no problem with Carson Beck being first team preseason All-America quarterback on ESPN team. But how about this? At running back, they put Ollie Gordon of Oklahoma State and Amarian Hampton of North Carolina. Now, Ollie Gordon I don't have a problem with, but Amarian Hampton at North Carolina over Quinshon Judkins at Ohio State feels a little disrespectful. Again, maybe they're thinking with another big-time back there at Ohio State that Judkins maybe won't be as impactful. Of course, he stayed at Ole Miss. Maybe he's a lock to be on this list. But I also thought maybe you could have given a look to Jaden Blue from Texas, with the injury to C.J. Baxter. Now Jaden Blue is going to be the workhorse of the backfield of Texas. I've also saw some people giving Jam Miller some love over at Alabama. Maybe they're thinking with Justice Haynes and other guys that Bama's going to, go running back by committee and spread the wealth there. But, yeah, no SEC quarterbacks there, again, or running backs there. And granted, they're only going with 2. But a North Carolina running back over Quinshon. Again, I get it. It's at Ohio State now. Wide receiver, they list 2. They've got Luther Burden from Missouri. Here's what ESPN says. He said when he came out of high school in East St. Louis, Burden was touted as the top receiving prospect in the country. He's lived up to that billing and then some at Missouri. He was second in the SEC and 9th nationally a year ago with 1,200 receiving yards, finished with 86 catches, and is electric in the open field. He ranked 3rd nationally with 725 yards after the catch. Then they list McMillan from Arizona as the other wide receiver. Again, don't know too much about him. I thought Trey Harris from Ole Miss could have gotten some love here, but no love for Trey Harris. Now, here's where it gets kind of funny. They list 5 offensive linemen. All 5 are from the SEC. They've got Will Campbell from LSU at 1 tackle spot. They've got Tate Ratledge from Georgia at a guard spot. They got Parker Brailsford from Alabama at the center spot. And then the other guard, they've got Tyler Booker from Alabama. And the other tackle, they've got Kelvin Banks from Texas. And what's funny is they actually list some guys for their second team. Second team center is Cooper Mays from Tennessee. And second team offensive tackle Emory Jones from LSU. So that just tells you right there. Where is the bulk of the elite talent in the SEC this year? Offensive lines. The O-lines getting a lot of love. Somewhere Cole Kublik is absolutely loving that because, look, who studies and knows the O-lines in the SEC better than Cole Kublik. But, yeah, Will Campbell from LSU, Tate Ratledge from Georgia, Kelvin Banks from Texas, and then Parker Brailsford and Tyler Booker, both from Alabama. It is kind of funny. I think a lot of Alabama fans thought there were so many issues on the offensive line last year. And now to have 2 preseason guys, and I get it, Parker Brailsford's coming over from Washington, where he played in Kalen DeBoer's offense. So, big-time center, they're going to come over. And look, Bama had those center snaps, issues with the snaps at center last year. And opted to go a different route. So you assume Brailsford and Jalen Miller are going to be on the same page and get all those issues fixed. But, yeah, again, I love the SEC's getting love on the O-line. I just thought maybe some of those skill positions maybe would have gotten a little bit more love. And then at the all-purpose spot, they list Travis Hunter from Colorado. Not a big shocker there. He's been the do-it-all everything, and we'll see how much Deion tries to win him the Heisman, just get him the football a ton on offense and defense. But all right, we'll see there. All right, coming up next, we're going to hit on the ESPN preseason defense first team and some SEC guys coming in there on the list as well. We'll hit on that in just a second, as well as some of the odds out on SEC rushing leaders and receiving leaders. We got all that to get to here on Locked On SEC. More to come right here after this, covering your team every day. First, I want to remind you guys, today's episode brought to you by our friends at the Game Time app, and Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace in Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer you get to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. And, of course, they got those zone deals on there where you save even more when you choose a section and let Game Time choose the seats for you. The all-in pricing, you got to toggle that feature, but once you turn it on, it shows your total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. The number is the number. You can even connect it to your Apple Pay and you go bing, bang, boom. Couple clicks, you are done and ready to go. And you get your tickets. Again, the lowest price guarantee on there as well. Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference if you take advantage of that special. And the Game Time ticket coverage. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app today. Create an account. Use our code LOCKEDONCollege. Get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account. Use our code LOCKEDONCollege. Get $20 off. Download Game Time today. It's last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, thank you guys for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Hey, for your second listen, check out Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin, getting you ready for the start of an exciting college football season on the gridiron. He's talking all the changes in college football, including realignment, transfer portal, NIL, all of it. Locked On College Football available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. All right, we're going to dive back into it as we're talking about ESPN's preseason All-America list, and we ran through the offense, so let's dive into the defense now, what they have to say as far as the SEC talent on the ESPN Preseason All-America first team defense. And start off, it is the big defensive end, James Pearce from Tennessee. They say Pearce was one of the sports breakout stars a year ago, enters his junior season as one of the most feared pass rushers in the country, tied for the SEC lead last year with 10 sacks, tied for fifth nationally with 38 total pressures, according to Pro Football Focus. 6'5" Pearce has bulked up since arriving on campus, now at 243 pounds, as some scouts think he could very well be the top defender taken in next year's draft. In fact, a couple of mocks have him slated to go number one overall. So big-time pick there at one defensive end spot. On the interior defensive tackles, they have Mason Graham from Michigan, and how about Deion Walker from Kentucky? ESPN writes, the 6'6", 348-pound Walker is a big blue mountain in the middle of Kentucky's D-line. He was a first-team All-SEC pick a year ago as a sophomore and will be among the most coveted interior D-linemen in next year's draft. Despite constantly drawing double teams, Walker led the Wildcats with 12.5 tackles for loss, including 7.5 sacks. And for a man his size, he's a remarkable athlete, ran the 100 meters in high school. At the other defensive end spot, a little surprised here. They did not go with Michael Williams from Georgia. In fact, they list him as the second team on ESPN's preseason list. Michael Williams, not a first-team All-American. They list Nick Scorton from Texas A&M. Now, I'm very high on Nick Scorton. I like him a lot. And as ESPN writes, he's back home after transferring from Purdue. He's from nearby Bryan, Texas, was a big-time pickup for the Aggies, and Mike Elko in the portal. Led the Big Ten with 10 sacks last year. He's 6'4", 285 pounds, had 42 total quarterback pressures a year ago, and both Michigan and Ohio State had problems blocking him when they played Purdue. His deep array of pass rush moves, according to PFF, is the best in the country. So Nick Scorton, Deion Walker, James Pearce, 3 out of the 4 D linemen on the ESPN preseason All-America team from the SEC. How about a linebacker? They've got Barrett Carter from Clemson, but the other 2 linebackers from the SEC. They got Danny Stutzman from Oklahoma and Harold Perkins from LSU. And here's what ESPN says on Stutzman. Few linebackers in college football possess the experience, production, and playmaking ability of Stutzman, who returns for his senior year, was huge for OU's defense last year. 6'4", 240 pounds, racked up 26.5 tackles for loss his past 2 seasons, led the Sooners with 104 total tackles. By the way, second team on this list, they list Deontay Lawson from Alabama. So Lawson didn't make first team, but he did make second team. How about Harold Perkins? ESPN says after considerable debate about where Perkins should play, he will return to inside backer while also moving outside, rushing the passer on third downs. The 6'1", 225-pound junior had 7.5 sacks as a freshman in an edge rusher role. He moved more to play inside last year, and sack numbers dipped a little bit, but he matched his freshman total of 13 tackles for a loss. Wherever Harold Perkins lines up, quarterbacks will have to be wary of him. Taking a look at the secondary, they do not have they have Will Johnson from Michigan and Ben Morrison from Notre Dame as the two corners. So no corners from the SEC. And then at safety, they only list Malachi Starks from Georgia. And here's what they say. Starks could become Georgia's first two-time All-America safety in nearly 40 years. He's been a rock for the Bulldogs on defense since his true freshman season. He excels in both stopping the run and playing coverage. He's 6'1", 205 pounds. He was fourth on Georgia's team last year with 52 total tackles, had 3 interceptions. And when the Bulldogs needed a big play, Malachi Starks has been there to make it. So Malachi Starks at one safety spot. The other safety spot, well, it's Caleb Downs, now at Ohio State, the former Alabama stud freshman safety. Hit the portal, and he's now at Ohio State. So if you stayed at Bama, you would have had two SEC safeties, both safeties from the SEC, but no, Caleb Downs now in the Big Ten, but Malachi Starks representing from the SEC. Kicker, they list Graham Nicholson, the big-time kicker who transferred to Alabama this offseason. So Bama gets in with their kicker, and then they list Florida State's punter as the All-America team punter, but James Burnett from Alabama made second-team punter. So Bama pretty well represented on this list with some playmakers. And obviously, they only list one quarterback, but you can make a case for Jalen Milroe. But that's the ESPN preseason All-America team offense and defense. And again, just seems like there's some bigger names from the SEC that we're missing here. But I get it. They can only list a certain amount of players. But SEC well represented on the offensive and defensive lines as well as linebacker. So take that for what you will. All right, let's dive into this. The folks over at Bet Online, they put out SEC receiving yards leaders and odds for who will be those receiving yards leaders this year. And they list Luther Burden as the odds-on favorite to become the SEC receiving yards leader this year. 3-1 odds. So, I mean, that's pretty heavily. They are thinking that Luther Burden is going to lead the SEC in receiving yards. And by the way, probably going to lead, be among the league leaders in the country in terms of receiving yards. Scott Brady Cookback, who knows how to get him the football. So Luther Burden coming in at number 1 on this list in terms of SEC receiving yards leader this year. The other guys make it in their top 10. Trey Harris from Ole Miss coming in at 7-1. So he's got the second best odds. Juice Wells, also at Ole Miss, coming in at 8-1. So we'll see who ends up being the, Ole Miss's leading receiver, but obviously going to be up there among the league leaders. Dominic Lovett at Georgia, they have 4th on this list at 11-1. Then there's a two-way tie. Deion Burks at Oklahoma and Theo Weiss at Missouri. They have both at 18-1. Found that interesting. They think Theo Weiss. I mean, what's the thought process there? Maybe Luther Burden draws all the double teams and Weiss opens it up and big playability, puts up some big yards down the field. Then you got a couple of guys at 20-1. That includes C.J. Daniels at LSU, Isaiah Bond at Texas, and Squirrel White at Tennessee. Now, I've had some people say, is Squirrel White getting a little bit too much love at Tennessee? Like, you think of Brew McCoy being back and all the other pieces they have there. But people are very high on Squirrel White for one reason or another. And LSU, nothing against C.J. Daniels. He was a 1,000-yard receiver at Liberty last year. But everything I've been hearing is Kyron Lacy is their number 1 guy. By the way, Kyron Lacy's in the next group behind this at 25-1. So, and then Isaiah Bond, we saw what he did at Alabama, and now he's going to be one of the go-to guys at Texas this year, so it makes sense for him to be on this list. And then there's a grouping of guys at 25-1. I'll just run through those. Barry and Brown at Kentucky, Trey Wilson at Florida, Jeremy Bernard at Alabama, Kyron Lacy at LSU, and Nick Anderson at Oklahoma. Oh, and Silas Bolden from Texas as well. So it's kind of interesting. These are the odds makers in how they're projecting, who could potentially be the SEC leading receiver this year. But Those guys are all 25-1 odds or better. Just going to throw out some guys who are long shots on here. They've got Chris Brazzell at Tennessee at 50-1. Noah Thomas at A&M at 50-1. That's the highest A&M player on this list. Look, Connor Wegman lives up to the hype like everybody thinks he may be. People talking about him as a potential high quarterback in next year's draft. If Connor Wegman is all that in a bag of potato chips, then Noah Thomas might be top 10 in the SEC in receiving yards. They're going to fling it around the field. A few other names on this list. They list Kobe Prentice at Alabama at 75-1. South Carolina appears on this list. Nick Harbor at 75-1. He's their big time weapon on offense. And then Andrew Armstrong over at Arkansas, 80-1. So he's had a great offseason. A lot of people believe in Andrew Armstrong. Found it funny though. Berrien Brown's at 25-1 at Kentucky. Dane Key, 80-1. They'll lead the SEC in receiving. And then, hey, if you really want to buy into some hype in Peyton Thorne over at Auburn, well, you can get some odds on Keandre Lambert-Smith at Auburn at 100-1. I like Keandre, but I just don't. Some of these freshmen for Auburn are going to play, right? Cam Coleman and Perry Thompson. I mean, we'll see. If Auburn's doing it right, they're spreading the football around the field. So we'll see. All right. Coming up next here on Locked On SEC, we'll run through the SEC rushing yard leader odds and see if we can get some value there. Hint, hint. The guy who got hurt at Texas, the other guy is going to be the workhorse. He's going to be high on this list. We'll talk about that coming up next here on Locked On SEC. All right, continue on here, Locked On SEC. Thank you guys for making us your first listen every day. And, look, it's talking season. We're running through a lot of the preseason list and, odds and things like that. And so we just ran through the list of Bet Online. They put out the SEC receiving yards leader odds on how they think this thing will shake up. How about the SEC rushing yards leader odds? And number one on top of this list, and this is definitely in reaction to the CJ Baxter injury over at Texas, but they've got Jaden Blue over at Texas, 7-1 odds to lead the SEC in rushing this year. So certainly, 7-1 still, valuable odds if you want to put a hundo on it or whatever you want to do there. Of course, you can do so over at FanDuel.com. FanDuel's got tons of odds and week-to-week game odds and all that kind of stuff, so check out FanDuel. But the rest of the guys on this list, just kind of run through the top 5, top 10. Behind Jaden Blue, so it's 7-1 Jaden Blue at Texas, 8-1 odds at Alabama. They put Jam Miller, which I find interesting. I was talking about that a little bit earlier. Like, maybe some people think that Justice Haynes could take some yardage away from him, but Jam Miller, 8-1 odds. And tied even with him, it's Jarquez Hunter at Auburn, who, as we know, is going to be a workhorse this year. Finished 7th in the league in rushing last year. Is Jarquez Hunter? Yeah, I would say he is the leading returning rusher from the SEC last year. Cody Schrader went to the NFL. Quinshon Judkins is at Ohio State. Jaden Daniels in the NFL. Ray Davis in the NFL. Jalen Wright in the NFL. Yeah, so Jarquez Hunter is your leading returning rusher in the SEC. And again, you can get him at 8-1 odds to lead the conference in rushing. They've listed fourth on this list at 9-1. It's Chip Trainum at Kentucky. Well, we just found out yesterday that he broke his hand and he's going to miss a couple of weeks. Now, some people saying maybe he'll only miss a game or two, but still going to be tough to be the SEC leading rusher if you miss a game or two. So, again, maybe those odds likely came up before Chip Trainum's injury. But also they're banking on Ray Davis was a top 5 rusher in the SEC a year ago, and they think Mark Stoops and company are going to run the football and run it well. Get pretty good odds on Trevor Etienne, 10-1 over at Georgia. So that's 5th best odds to lead the conference in rushing. I think Georgia's going to run it a lot with Trevor Etienne. I mean, if we're being real, last year, Deshaun Edwards and Kendall Milton both were nearly top 10 in the league in rushing. Deshaun Edwards was 9th. Kendall Milton was 11th. And by the way, Trevor Etienne was 12th, while Montrell Johnson was 10th. So kind of interesting there. By the way, Montrell Johnson, they've got down on this list. They got Montrell Johnson at 25-1. Doesn't it feel like Florida's going to run the crap out of the ball with Montrell Johnson? Guy who finished 10th in the league in rushing a year ago. That one might be worth taking a look. Of course, the newcomer, Gavin Sawchuk at Oklahoma. He's at 11-1 on this list. He was a very good rusher at Oklahoma last year. Jaquindon Jackson at Arkansas takes over for Rocket Sanders. I like Jaquindon Jackson, man. I like what we saw out of him in the spring. I think he's going to be very productive. Maybe not enough love here for Dylan Sampson at Tennessee. They list him at 15-1. Ever since Josh Heupel's been there at Tennessee, they've run the football very well. Jalen Wright was 6th in the league in rushing last year. Sampson was 17th last year. Now, if he's the main guy, 15-1 odds, pretty good. Some of the other names on here, Rocket Sanders at 15-1. You get good odds on Ulysses Bentley, 15-1. If you think he's going to be the main workhorse at Ole Miss, look at Quinshon. He was 2nd in the league in rushing a year ago. Ulysses Bentley could certainly be top 2, top 3. And then other names of note, Marcus Carroll at Missouri. They have 16-1. Of course, we all know what Cody Schrader did last year, so they're predicting Marcus Carroll could do the same thing. And then they're a little split on LSU. They got Josh Williams at 20-1 and then Caleb Jackson at 25-1. So LSU likely going a little bit of running back by committee there, and that's probably why that the odds are split on that one. But no doubt, teams are going to run the football in the SEC and run it very well, as they typically do. Some other names on here that we didn't mention: Le'Veon Moss at A&M. They've got 40-1. With Amari Daniels at 75-1, obviously with the injury this past week to their third running back. Now it's the show between Le'Veon Moss and Amari Daniels to tote the rock there with Ruben Owens done for the year. Kind of interesting, no quarterbacks on this list. Well, they do list Jackson Dart at 150-1 odds, but it's kind of interesting because remember, Jaden Daniels was 3rd in the league in rushing last year in the SEC. And you go back, the year prior, he was top 10 in the league in rushing. You go back to 2021, Emory Jones was, I think, 10th or 11th up there. KJ Jefferson had a lot of rushing yards. Just kind of interesting that, they don't think there's going to be many quarterbacks, I guess, rushing a ton this year. But, man, I mean, maybe Lenore Sellers, you can get some good odds on him over at South Carolina to maybe finish top 10 in the league in rushing. I don't know. It's kind of shooting off the cuff, thinking off the top of my head, but trying to think of, some running quarterbacks in the conference that might have potential to finish top 10 in the league in rushing. But those are the odds from BetOnline. They put out SEC rushing yards leader odds. So again, Jaden Blue at Texas expected to, according to the Vegas odds, expected to lead the league in rushing this year, and Luther Burden from Missouri expected to lead the league in receiving yards. Rarely ever works out that way, how we think it's going to work out. So let's see who surprises us this year in the SEC. Before we get out of here, I did want to mention Paul Feinbaum and Heather Dinich making an appearance on Get Up on ESPN. And they were asked for their thoughts on by Mike Greenberg on Get Up. Who are their preseason picks for the national title? Feinbaum, of course, talking all things SEC as he does. He went with the Georgia Bulldogs to win their 3rd national title of the Kirby Smart era. He did have a caveat with one other program that makes him a bit leery of riding with the Bulldogs. He said, I like Georgia. I'm not as sold as Georgia as I was last year. And the reason I'm a little bit leery is Ohio State may have the best roster in the country. But Georgia is still my pick to win it all. Heather Dinich kind of said the same thing. She said, of course, how can I pick against Georgia given this specific question? Greenberg did offer up his own prediction. He said that Ohio State will win its first title under Ryan Day. He said, Paul Feinbaum told me it cost $20 million for their players this year. They're going to get their money's worth in Columbus. So everybody picking Georgia and Ohio State. Look, it's a playoff now. There's more opportunities. I think we all think Georgia and Ohio State will make the playoff. But, man, more opportunities to get upset. You got more games you got to win. You got to bring your A game every week of those rounds of the playoffs, and more opportunity to get upset, be ousted before you even get to the title game. So we'll see how it plays out. All right, thank you guys for making Locked On SEC your first listen of the day. Hey, for your second listen, check out Locked On College Football. Spencer McLaughlin getting you ready for the start of another college football season. Locked On College Football available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. I'm Chris Gordy. This has been Locked On SEC. You guys have a great day, and we'll talk to you guys real soon here, talking all things college football and the SEC.